unmute myself. Now everybody can see and hear us.
Woohoo!
Hey, hello, people.
I think it says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people. One of which is Fred.
Yep.
Woohoo, like that.
You know, Fred is clearly our biggest book club fan because I don't see him on many other recordings, but he shows up to the book club every now and then. So, all right, so we've been chatting. People in the stream missed it. We've been chatting about what the heck we're going to read next, and we have settled on The Crystal Cave by Mary Stewart. Get some Arthurian legend in for the new year. You've got it so it just says The Crystal. You got to move up a little bit. There you go.
Voila.
So...
Wait, there's a sword in it? We can't read it. It's lasers only.
Yeah.
Lasers only? Only laser swords?
Lasers, it's
Okay, I'll allow
it's okay
laser
if there's
swords.
scabbards, right? As long as there's not a sword in it. Because there's a scabbard in the book for tonight, but there's no sword.
That's true.
Alrighty. Let me hit record on the audio. Fred is waving at us. All right. Trace, you ready?
Sure.
All right, let's do it.
Alright. This episode of the Tome Show is brought to you by our patrons. You can support the show like them at patreon.com/The Tome Show. Welcome to the Tome Book Club for December of 2021. The Tome is a D&D news, reviews, and interviews show, and I'm your Tome host, Tracy Hurley.
And I'm Jeff Greiner. In each book club episode, we discuss one D&D-ish related book. Spoilers be damned in full book club style. Our book this time around is A Christmas Carol in Prose, Being a Ghost Story of Christmas by Charles Dickens.
And with us, as always, is Eric Paquette.
Bonjour, hello.
How are you doing tonight, Eric?
Next up,
I'm doing fine.
Not feeling haunted?
Maybe, I don't know.
we'll have to wait and see what happens when the clock
Right.
strikes the next hour. And next episode, which we'll record towards the end of February, we'll be reading The Crystal Cave by Mary Stewart.
Before we get started, I want to say thank you to our patrons that help us pay the bills. You can help us out too by going to patreon.com/The Tome Show and offering up as little as $1 a month and be a patron just like all of those other lovely folks. Now on to the book. We read the book commonly known as A Christmas Carol, although I did read the entire original title at the top of the episode here. Tracy and I tend to listen to audiobooks. Eric tends to read Dead Tree books. Was that the case?
Well, in this case, I read it through the Project Gutenberg ebook.
So you read the ebook. Tracy, did you listen to the audio?
I did. I had Hugh
You
Grant.
had Hugh. That's the episode. That's the version I just finished listening to today. It is I find the audiobooks tend to run usually 2.5 to 3.5 hours. It's a really quick listen to. So I actually listened to 5 different versions of A Christmas Carol in the last 2 weeks. I listened to the Hugh Grant one today. I started with what's his name? Oh shoot! Now I'm gonna forget it. I listened to a couple that turned out to be audio dramas, not the actual books. They were revised. So one of which was sort of normal length, and one of which was really, really abbreviated. It was a 28-minute version of the book starring Sir Laurence Olivier. And I cannot get my Audible to show me the things.
The ebook version that I on Project Gutenberg had the illustrations. So.
Oh, Tim Curry. Tim Curry's the one I was thinking of. Tim Curry's the first one I listened to. And actually, I think it was the better of the versions. Although the Hugh Grant one was actually pretty good too. So I listened to 2 audio dramas, and Tim Curry and Hugh Grant, and then the Blackstone audiobook version, which is the one that I had actually previously listened to before this book club, and I re-listened to that one as well. So I have been. If I didn't know the story of A Christmas Carol well before, I'm never going to know it better than I currently know it. And I have to say, there are the ones where the audio drama ones, like, there were some choices made in terms of how to change things and what to change and what have you. And I don't know that I always feel like they made a good choice. So it's interesting.
And I think Eric was saying that because he did the Project Gutenberg one, he got to see the original art.
Oh, the original art. Nice.
The original art in the ebook format, they scanned it out, and you can actually, when you read it, so you can actually see that art. So it's nice.
That's really cool. Yeah, no, I have previously read. So I've read A Christmas Carol a bunch because when I was teaching 7th grade for 8 years in Raleigh, the language arts teacher across the hall from me that was on my team, so we had all the same students, they read it every year. And I always read it, I mean, being as short as it is, I always read it sort of in solidarity with them. So I also have a comic book graphic novel version. I used to have an iPad app that had little, like, things that you could manipulate on the screen, or little animations that would pop up that were kind of cool to make it interactive, which is also sort of an abridged version of the story. So I have not although that app has gone away, so I guess they decided not to keep updating it. But no, I have consumed this story in a variety of formats and multiple times over the years. The one I notably was talking to Ginny Loveday, who we recently talked to for our discussion of Strixhaven, about on Facebook. She and I were chatting that I somehow missed out on the opportunity to watch the Muppets Christmas Carol, which actually features apparently Charles Dickens as a character in the story as well.
Yes.
It has been, I don't know that if I've ever seen it, and if I have, it's been since I was a child, so I don't remember it.
It's a Hurley family tradition.
So I've talked a lot about my experience with A Christmas Carol. Where are the rest of you all at?
Well, for me, most of the time was just watching, like, the Muppets Christmas Carol or various others on TV when it played during those. This is actually my first time actually going about and reading the Christmas Carol as the book. So.
Okay. Tracy, what about you?
I know I've had to read it for school. I read it on my own many times, and then have seen many movies and other recreations of it. It was the first time I heard the audiobook. This was the first time I really.
The Hugh Grant one was pretty good, I thought. I was a little worried that I would be thinking to myself, "Oh, it's Hugh Grant the whole time," and I don't know that I recognize his voice at all. I didn't recognize Tim Curry's voice either. So.
Yeah, and I won't say it has no flaws, but it is one of my favorite stories, I think.
Okay.
Because there's a lot going on in it, but we can...
Yeah. There are elements of this story, and we can talk about them, I guess, as we go through, but there are elements of the story that, having read or listened or watched it as many times as I have now, I'm like, I don't know why... Like, not to say that I know better than Charles Dickens, but I don't know why he made some of the choices he made. Things to discuss, things to include, things to whatever, other than he's being paid by the word, and so sometimes he would throw in some superfluous details just for that sake, I guess. I don't know.
Well, so there's the main story, right? The story of someone who... is very Scrooge-like. Oh wait, isn't Scrooge-like because he actually is Scrooge. And just is potentially, going about life maybe not in all the right ways, and gets visited by a ghost in the shape of the door knocker, and then later on in his chamber. And I'm just gonna. It's a 2-hour audiobook. Like, there's not much plot here.
Well, and everybody knows it too. So yeah.
Yeah, and is being tormented for eternity because he valued basically money and business over people, and does not want the same thing to happen to Ebenezer Scrooge, and so warns him that he will be visited 3 times that night by spirits to help set him on the right path, or at least see the possibility that lays before him if he does not change his ways.
The ghosts of Christmas, past, present, and future.
Yet to come.
Oh, yes, I suppose.
Yeah. And then each of those ghosts are really just vignettes of different scenes. So you actually pack... The plot isn't a ton, right? But you pack a lot of detail and a lot of individual stories into the rest of the book, because none of them have to go that deep. Just has to make the points that they're trying to make, which heavily anti-capitalism, spoilers.
Right. Well, and there is a degree to which, like, as much as I started off by saying, like, he made some choices I don't know that I would have made if I was the author, although I'm not near the, I'm not an author, let alone the type of author that has the right to really criticize Charles Dickens. Or if I was the editor, there are things that I would have been like, let's cut this out. But at the same time, having listened to it as many times as I have in the last few weeks, it starts to become a little mechanical, because I'm like, okay, I know what's coming, I know the choices he made, and I start analyzing it for, okay, so what is this scene doing in the story, right? I know where it's going, I know what's coming, what is the purpose of this? And he is really deft at sort of establishing important elements of the character in very short time frame, right? He throws in what is possibly, superficially unnecessary bits about the people coming asking for money for the poor, or the child singing at the keyhole, singing Christmas carols at him through the keyhole, and that kind of stuff at the beginning of the story. But because like that kid with the keyhole, like, doesn't matter to the story, except it does a really good job of highlighting him as a character and how his character changes and when his character changes, right? There are these, during those vignettes as he's being visited by the spirits that Tracy talked about, there are these moments throughout where he's like, oh, I really wish I could talk to so-and-so right now. And it's all these people from the beginning. It's Bob, or it's Fred, or it's this kid at the keyhole. Tracy?
Yeah, and I was gonna say it helps give us pieces of his life that we have experienced before the ghosts even come, and gives it callbacks, so that we also experienced and witnessed by reading those events, versus having to pick individual events out of an entire life story, and which would require a lot more space and time.
Yeah. Eric, you look like you were going to say something.
So,
okay.
I mean, he is very quick at, okay, here's the character, here's Scrooge, he's this miserly individual who just doesn't spend much and just wants to keep his money, and doesn't like people or of that, or feels unloved and all that, and just wants to be left alone, which you need at the start, because the character gets a drastic life change moment.
Right.
True.
Yeah, and so he's visited by Marley. That's his old partner, who's the ghost. And then he's visited by the 3 spirits of Christmases, past, present, and yet to come. As Eric ably reminded me, is the proper title for the last spirit. And through those, he sees these little vignettes that Tracy was talking about of his own past, before he had sort of become so miserly and greedy, when he used to celebrate Christmas, and there were good things in his life, and there were friends, and there were romantic partners, and there was a boss who really could have been a model for him of how to be a business owner who didn't neglect his workers, didn't abuse his workers. We see the Christmas present shows him, what's going on with Bob Cratchit and what's going on with his nephew Fred. And then all these little scenes, like when he rushes out to like the lighthouse and watches a couple of lighthouse workers and shows their Christmas, and occasionally they do these little vignettes of people that aren't actually connected to him at all, just to sort of say, hey, this is how people do things, it's all right. And then the Ghost of Christmas is Yet to Come shows him the future, and it doesn't seem like the very distant future, wherein Tiny Tim, Bob Cratchit, his employee's kid has died, and he has died. And it's really interesting because, like, it seemed to me the first few times reading it this time around, like, I mean, obviously I know that it's him that's dead, right? And it just seemed obvious to me, like the story isn't even trying to hide the fact that it's him that's dead. And then I realized in my last two, well, they're kind of trying to hide that it's him. Like, Scrooge doesn't know that it's him. Is the audience supposed to realize that it's him? Because it's a little on the nose, And then he wakes up and he's like, oh my gosh, I can't let those things happen, and I had forgotten who I should have been, and I saw the way my life is affecting others, and so I'm changing my ways, and he celebrates, and he buys a giant turkey for the Cratchits, and he goes in and has Christmas dinner with his nephew, and it's all happily ever after. God bless us, everyone, right?
Yeah.
Is that more or less the story between the three of us? Did we get it all?
That's more or less the story. I mean, you have a little bit about Tiny Tim being sick, and he might die unless he's well taken care of, which requires Scrooge to possibly change his ways, I think. One thing I do enjoy is that it is a flip on the ghosts relationship in stories. Usually in a ghost story, the ghost is trying to get peace and do something to pass along. Oh. In this case, it is Scrooge that needs to do that in order to live. So it is a switch on the typical ghost story.
Now that's interesting. That's interesting. Part of me was wondering, like, this is an interesting choice for us to read. Other than we know it's really quick and easy to do, and it has these fantasy elements. But there was a part of me that's like, I don't know how much I connect Victorian Charles Dickens sort of storytelling to my life as a gamer, right? But that does raise an interesting option of maybe you have the ghosts that appear that aren't, help me put my spirit to rest, but instead become the NPCs that are aiming to help the characters find some sort of redemption.
Yeah. There's a wonderful, wonderful cooperative board game called Mysterium, where in it one of the players plays a ghost that has been murdered and is asking the others to solve their murder. Just a problem in the game. The ghost can only speak in imagery, but you can still have in the game, in the D&D game, you can have that ghost. It's still the resolution on that, but they're trying to help the players. They might not be able to communicate what exactly they saw, but they could give out imagery, they could give hints and stuff like that, but they're still trying to help.
And the fact that they are ghosts trying to help a character on a sort of redemption story then makes me want to very specifically integrate this idea into Descent into Avernus, which is a WotC published 5th edition campaign that is about redemption. It is a redemption story, and so it would be interesting to throw in, even if they're not spirits, although they could be. You're right. You're running around in hell. They could be actual souls that have been condemned to hell, trying to work their way out or whatever. They're trying to seek their redemption by helping others gain theirs and whatever, right? It's just sort of, you could layer that a lot into Avernus with that concept. Interesting.
And I went on DM's Guild to see earlier about if there's any other D&D stuff that is inspired, because it's public domain. So and I did find 4 of them. One of them, which when I read about it, it made sense to me. A Domain of Dread set inspired by. Well, to me, that made sense.
And there are. I guess there were. I'd have to think back to what's in Van Richten's, but there were Domains of Dread that were very Victorian in their. I mean, the horror genre that started Ravenloft, right, with Barovia and several of the others are steeped in Victorian horror. We also have the Frankenstein's monster sort of character or domain that has that sort of stuff going on, and so there's a lot of Victorian horror built into Ravenloft. You could definitely pull some ideas from there.
Yeah.
Another way to consider looking at it is murder hobos, because how different are murder hobos compared to dear old Scrooge?
Mm-hmm.
And potentially visiting the characters that are doing that could be interesting. Because one of the things to me is that it succinctly, like, I get that it's an argument with itself, right? So it's not like he's actually convincing a real life human named Scrooge about the errors of his ways, but that is what he is trying to do, is over the course of the thing, through by and large Scrooge's own memories and then the connections he has to other people that get reignited by looking at old memories, walk through what is actually happening to those people, like making it not just about Scrooge and his own anger and fear and betrayal and all those emotions. It's like, what is the actual ramifications of what you're doing to other people, and let you see them, which could be an interesting way to potentially deal with murder hobos.
Yeah, I'd actually, when I was thinking about it during a few of my reads and thinking about, okay, how does this relate to D&D? What inspiration can I pull from for D&D? And it occurred to me, I think I started off thinking about it wrong. Like, at first I was like, well, you could use it, and that's sort of where we've been talking, and I think it actually works this way, of having the spirits as NPCs and working on redemption or changing their ways from murder hoboism, etc. I think works really well. And then it occurred to me, what would be a fun adventure? The PCs are the spirits. They're not Scrooge. Yeah. They're the spirits, and they're pulling this crazy heist. And that's why the ghost or the spirit of Christmas is yet to come doesn't talk, because it's actually one of the same characters from the earlier one, and they don't want to reveal their voice. Because other PCs have to be in the background, like pulling off the spells or the illusions or whatever to make the whole thing, work. So,
well, one of the ideas, but also when I was reading it about is that in Planescape, which also the city of Sigil is very Victorian aspect, but Planescape, if a character causes threat to Sigil, the Lady of Pain will create a dungeon around them and launch them off into the astral plane.
The mazes, yeah.
You can actually go to those that are prisoners. Yeah. So one of the mission could be, you have someone who's in prison, their goal is to go in there and free them somehow, but in order to free them, they have to make them change their ways. So
that could work, yeah.
So
absolutely. Yeah. I also considered, Scrooge himself might be an interesting NPC to run into in a game. And like, part of me is like, you as a DM, you build libraries of NPCs in your head, and you for internal consistency, you may have like, oh, this character is this movie actor, or this character is James Bond, or this character is whatever, right? You could absolutely be like, oh, this character is Scrooge before the haunting, and this character is Scrooge after the haunting, just to sort of maintain that level of internal consistency, right? That you've got these NPCs now that have these stories, and they may never come into play in the game, but having that level of internal consistency and that level of inspiration at least helps me as a DM have characters and have a game world that feels a little bit more alive.
there's definitely a lot of having a living world in that book. Even things like when I forget her name right now, but the person that he was like engaged to, the woman, her later husband comes home and is like, "You'll never guess who I saw today." And it was right after his after Marley died, and they're just like, they're kind of laughing like, "Hey, at least we're not him."
Right. Yeah. Well, and I think, as I think about this story, and I think about it from the perspective, okay, so if I'm running this game, there are things like where we were mentioning before, he tends to get a little extra, a little superfluous on occasion. There are elements that I think maybe work on a literary sense. But it took me, I probably had to listen or read to this book in various incarnations, I don't know, 5 or 6 times before I could figure out, like, why he does some of the weird things with time. Right? Obviously, time is a theme, and we got past, present, and yet to come. But then, like, Marley tells him, one spirit is going to come to you tonight, the next one's going to come to you tomorrow, the next one's going to come to you the next day, which was, and then Scrooge is like shocked afterwards. Oh, they did it all in one night. It's like, well, yeah, so clearly Marley was either wrong or lying. They don't show up at the times that Marley says they're going to show up. And on one hand, like, there's an allegory there that I think works in literature. It's one's today, which relative to Christmas is the past. One is the present, which is the present and of Christmas Day, and one is yet to come, which is the day after Christmas. So that one represents the future. But of course, they don't actually. The time in between doesn't actually matter, and then they go back in time and drop him off exactly where they left him. Which suggests that maybe he was right at the beginning, and that there's more gravy than grave to this whole thing, right? It could very well be that he just had a really bad dream, and as a result, completely changed his life. Who knows, right?
Yeah.
Just a bit of indigestion.
Right? A bit of beef. Some bad potato.
And the other thing is like, time is so interesting, particularly for Victorians, because, like, that's just the start rate of where we really have timed time.
A more sort of standardized time where everybody, where clocks start being more ubiquitous and whatever. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so that could be interesting because, like, does it really matter what day they come?
It doesn't, because it doesn't impact the story at all, other than the sort of allegory, right? And that's what I'm saying is that's the kind of thing that if I'm running A Christmas Carol D&D adventure, I probably leave that stuff out. Especially the today, tomorrow, the next day, and it all happens in one night. I mean, it works literary, but then there's also the first spirit will come at midnight, and then he wakes up at 2, or he didn't go to bed until 2, but then when he's woken up by the spirit, it's midnight. And it's like, well, that was a weird and unnecessary time jump that doesn't really have any explanation that I can find on the internet. I searched around for it. There are some, like, Dickens scholars who are like, I don't know, it didn't really make sense, but here's my theory.
Well, another thing, so kind of like talking about a little bit about how the part of the context of the story is specific to the time he wrote it, because obviously he couldn't know about our time today and what we bring to the book. The fact that bakeries were open at the very beginning of Christmas morning. I think at first to help, like, they just sell stuff, but also that's where people bring their meals to help them get cooked, which is just completely not something most of us experience. Because
they have ovens and everybody else just has, a fireplace or whatever.
Right, and it makes sense because the ovens are probably already hot, so why waste it? And all these people have to cook, and they might not even have a space big enough to cook some of the
Right.
meals that they're talking about, like the goose and stuff. But it was interesting in juxtaposition this in a local group from my town. A bakery had mentioned that they were going to be open Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, and it was like people were angry that they were going to be open uh, on Christmas at all. And I would just so experience that and then experience the book, and
Yeah.
it's like how we just have stuff, and that wasn't all that long ago when and during a time period when we would think that people would be more strict about being closed on Christmas.
Right. One would think in the Victorian era, the level of religiosity. I'm going to say that's a word. One would presume was much higher.
Right.
So I think.
So it was very interesting.
Yeah.
So I like some of the extra words because they give us a glimpse into a different time.
No, I don't know that I disliked any of the extra words, and they don't tend to take up a lot of time. And like I said, there is a degree to which there's extra words, but they deftly aren't extra. Like they tell us something about the character or his history or the changes he's going through or whatever. But there's other areas where it's like I don't know what the purpose was of the spirit time traveling 2 hours and showing up at midnight when Scrooge didn't go to bed until 2. I don't know what the purpose of the second spirit showing up half an hour later or whatever. Because he was like, okay, well, I'm going to stay up and I'm going to catch this spirit when it shows up, and then it was 1, and then it was 1:15, and then it was 1:30, and the spirit's still not there. And eventually.
Do you think that?
Yeah, go ahead.
And I know it's all theory, and you've probably come across a theory like this. Is it partially just to put Scrooge into his place?
I mean, that could be. The theory that I saw, at least about the first spirit time jump, it just sort of highlights the supernaturalness of the spirits and their ability to sort of bend time and warp the natural world. But I don't know. It seems to me like if you have a spirit that constantly changes form and it wears a candle snuffer on its head to snuff out its light, it's pretty established, and taking you through time to see visions of your past and whatever. Like the supernaturalness seems and ability to manipulate time seems already pretty well established. But and the other thing, one of the readings, it occurred to me that first spirit, because it's described at one point as like constantly changing shape, and it has a different number of like body parts, different number of heads and eyes and whatever. It felt a little Lovecraftian to me. It is an entity beyond human comprehension, and thus it is impossible to pin down what it looks like, sort of thing, which is not how it's ever been depicted in any of the movies I've seen, anyway.
Right.
So it turns out the first spirit. The first spirit. My argument is the first spirit is a small Lovecraftian horror from beyond the stars. What were you saying, Eric?
Well, in the movies they don't describe, they don't show it as a weird formless thing. I think. I recall for Muppets, it's a very light figure that they have as a Muppet for.
I think I don't know why, but for that specific spirit, I always end up in my head going to was it the Jim Carrey version, where the first spirit almost kind of looks like a candle and has a head that has a sort of a wispy sort of light to it that looks like a candle that matches sort of the theme of the candle snuffer really well. So, but it also doesn't change form, and it could have because it was completely animated.
Yeah.
So.
But yeah, I'm wondering if the formless shape and all that for the spirit of Christmas past was meant to represent all the, like an amalgamation of all the people who has met up with Scrooge in the past, but you can't really focus on one of them because where he is right now, he has sort of forgotten about them until they go back in the spots and the spirit does show.
Well, and then eventually it does sort of, like, it describes like it's shapeless and it keeps changing, whatever, and then it sort of settles in on one form. And so part of me was wondering if it's not just describing Scrooge sort of acclimating to interacting with spirits, right? It has a form beyond your comprehension, and so for a moment you were just completely freaked out of your mind about and couldn't perceive it properly, and then we're able to sort of focus it on it, and that's why none of the other spirits were like that, just because at that point he had trained himself to be able to perceive the spirits in a way that doesn't drive him crazy. But I also like the idea that the spirits are actually Lovecraftian horrors. That's another D&D adventure you could write. You could do A Christmas Carol, but each of the spirits is some sort of Lovecraftian horror.
A being from the Star Realm.
And after they show you visions and illusions of the things that you need to see, then you have to defeat it because it's D&D.
Oh gosh, how many hit points does one of those spirits have?
A lot.
Enough until you realize you made a mistake.
But I want to bring in the Ghost of Christmas Is Yet to Come, though, to my game, because he's really easy to play. I don't have to come up with silly voices or anything. Although one of the second non-Laurence Olivier 2.5 hour Audible original audio drama version, they gave that spirit lines. He spoke. And I'm like, oh, I don't like that at all. Like, that's kind of like key to who this character is. Don't have him talking. He's supposed to be silent, and that's part of what freaks Scrooge out.
Yeah. In the audio dramas, do they, the ones that you listen to doesn't give them a voice, do they describe what he's doing?
Yeah, so the other both audio dramas lean very heavily on there being a narrator. And that sort of describes and sets the scene and whatever. It just sort of like, it does things like, there's the scene where Bob Cratchit's wife goes and gets the pudding. And she was very worried about too much flour, or it wouldn't have cooked thoroughly, or even somebody, I think it describes somebody, that she was worried that somebody may have jumped into the backyard and stolen the pudding out of the copper. But in the Audible original audio drama version, all of those lines were like given to kids. Oh, what if this happened? What if that happened? Oh, no, it'll be fine. Mom goes from being the one that's worried about it to being the one like, no, it'll be okay. So it's a bit of a twist on the story. It changes some of the dynamics a little bit. But I think it's because, they have all these actors they've hired to play these parts. We better give them lines. So.
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting because I've been watching, there's a YouTube channel, I think it's called James Townsend's. They do 18th century cooking, and one of the ones they did was plum pudding. And like, what is that actually? And it's not actually the fruit plums, but I think usually raisins and stuff like that. And talking about how they cooked it. And I was, having now known that, I was totally with Mrs. Cratchit, like, wow, if that goes wrong, that's a big deal.
And of course, it's a very sort of Victorian England idea of a pudding too. It's not what we as Americans think of as puddings.
Well, it's a British Christmas pudding, which is more like what we would call as a fruit cake.
Right.
And it is ubiquitous in terms of like, everyone from the rich to the poor tends to have it on their table for Christmas. Mm-hmm. Like, it is the quintessential iconic thing for Christmas. So if it does not appear, it is not Christmas.
Fred points out that pudding is just a word for dessert, apparently.
been watching a lot of a YouTube series, YouTube channel called Sorted, where they're British folks and they do actually cooking. And so I've seen what
Right.
Christmas pudding is and all that. So to me, it was like, oh, okay, that's what it was.
Big deal.
Yeah.
Well, anybody else have other thoughts or bits of inspiration you're pulling from A Christmas Carol?
There are sometimes interesting things about the female characters that I'm not as excited about. But, like, Mrs. Cratchit is all ready to give it right in to him. I did, when he was overhearing it, like, she did not hold back there.
Yeah, that you're talking about when Bob was all, what was it, toasting to Scrooge's health or whatever. She's like, do we have to? Like, let's not. Yeah.
You are underpaid and undervalued as an employee, but you seem to think you can go nowhere else. And so, no, I am not going to, like, be overly thankful to a dude, but okay, fine. If you really feel like you need to, we'll do it.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's, I mean, we're reading a Victorian story from Charles Dickens. I did not anticipate that this would be a great tale of feminism, right? It's a
also wasn't terrible.
But at the same time, it wasn't terrible. There was a little, what is it, the whole Topper at Fred's party chasing the one sister, the plump sister, sort of bit, and it's like, well, the story is told in such a way of like, oh, it's just young, sort of flirtatious love, but we don't actually know that she's into it because she is actively trying to get away from him during the blind man's buff game, so
right.
There may be some issues with some of those things, right? But yeah, no, I mean, it's not terrible, but it's largely not terrible because I guess women don't play any major characters. There aren't major characters that are women other than, well, even his love interest, I would argue, has a huge impact, but isn't really a major character. Doesn't show up much.
Well, other than the spirits and, well, she appears she does appear a few times because there's obviously the time when they break up,
right?
And there's like a few scenes leading up to
sister.
That, and then there's the when her husband sees him,
right? Yeah. So I mean, yeah, no, she pops up a few times. Bob Cratchit's wife pops up a few times. The sister pops up a few times, or is mentioned, at least shows up once and is mentioned later on because that's Fred's mother. There's mention of Fred's wife, and she appears a few times. Once in the Christmas present vignette, and then once at the end when it's actual Christmas and Scrooge changes it by showing up at the party.
And she's in the Christmas Yet to Come too when he asks, I think, for is there any anyone think like any reaction, emotional bond to this person that died, and they first show, isn't it first Fred gets the money? Or am I misremembering?
There might have been a scene there with Fred, and then it goes to the random couple that are just happy that the guy that they owe money to is dead.
Right. Okay. So maybe that's the one that I'm thinking of, and just got confused.
And there's also, I mean, when he sees in the Christmas Is Yet to Come, he sees the people he kind of used to know and the business people that he interacted with. There's no women in that, but when it comes to the people selling all of his stuff that they looted,
yes,
there is a woman prominently displayed there who, and there is a little bit of a commentary, social commentary on the role of women, I guess, in that scene, because there's like, she's like, well, I was the first one here. I don't have any struggle showing people what I found or whatever, but then they made her go last anyway.
Right, and she had taken the bed
Right.
curtains, and was it his sheets or blanket?
His sheets and his
Sure,
his clothes that he was going to be buried in.
they took it right off his
Right.
body.
And I guess there was I guess maybe two of the three of those people selling stuff were women. I can't remember. There was the Undertaker's man, the laundress. But I feel like the second one was the one that he said, the pawnbroker basically was oh well, I'll give you this for it, and I'm really being more generous than I should. And, women were always my weakness. I always give them too much or whatever. But then it was also the last one was a woman, so maybe it was two women and the Undertaker's man. So, all right. Any other thoughts on A Christmas Carol? It's a short book. We'll make it a slightly shorter episode, 45 minutes in. That's not too short. So, all right, then I guess we're going to go ahead and call that the end of this episode. It is time to say goodbye, so I want to say thanks to our patrons at patreon.com/The Tome Show.
And you'd like to contact us, you can email us thetomeshow@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter at Sarah Darkmagic. That's Sarah with an H, and at sarahdarkmagic.com. You can find Jeff at Squatch, SQUACH. Eric, where can folks find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Eric Impact, ERICMPAQ.
The show is at The Tome Show. You can find us on Facebook, Patreon, and Discord. Watch us live as we record the episode on twitch.tv/Tome Show, or watch the video after the fact on the Tome Show's YouTube channel. Show notes and other great shows at thetomeshow.com.
And that's our thoughts on A Christmas Carol, in prose, being a ghost story of Christmas. Next up for February, we are reading The Crystal Cave by Mary Stewart, because I don't know that we've read any Arthurian stories yet. Until then, keep turning the page, Tomites. Recording stopped. The end.
People like using Fezziwig's Party too, for as an event in D&D's modules.
I can see that. It's sort of a common touchstone for just a sort of lighthearted celebration, right?
Yeah. And I forgot to mention Mickey's Christmas Carol, which is also one of the best Christmas carols ever.
I've mostly seen, so because we used to watch it read it every year at the school I was at, that was always our before winter break Christmas party movie, is we would always watch A Christmas Carol. And so there's a Patrick Stewart version, and there's the Jim Carrey version. I think those are the two that I've watched most often. And the Jim Carrey version was also the one that came out like shortly after 3D movies became a thing, and so it was released as a 3D movie. So there's the weird scenes, unnecessary scenes of them like flying around holding the hand of the spirits and whatever, just so they could show off the 3D technology. So like happened in those early days with 3D movies, where there was 3D for no particular reason, just to show off the technology.
Yes.
We can,
play
so we
towards
will.
you.
All right, well, our timing was good because my oldest son has a robotics competition tonight and is going to be texting me at any moment to come pick him up. So it's nice that we wrapped up in time for me to do that, and my wife doesn't have to go run across the town in the middle of the night. So I will talk to you all in February. Let me find OBS and we can say goodbye to the stream. So say goodbye, stream.
Goodbye,
Bye.
Shay.